Also the co-chair of Black Activists Rising Against the Cuts, BARAC, a key organisation that is standing up against racism. She's a friend and a poet, Zita Holbourne.
Greetings everyone! How are you doing? Fantastic to see so many people here standing up against racism. We must remember, we are the majority, those of us that stand up against racism, those of us that stand in unity. Yesterday was the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racism. And the theme this year is to call on leaders to stamp out racism. Well, actually, our leaders in this country are the ones creating a racist state, an apartheid state in the UK. So I think that they should be sanctioned by the UN for their failure to combat racism. And we should call on them and put pressure on them. I bring greetings from Mark Sawatka, who's the General Secretary of PCS, and also from my co-chair of BARAC, Lee Jasper, who can't be here today. Solidarity and unity all the way. Those of us, like myself, who are second generation in this country, pass to our children a worse future than that was passed to us when our parents faced the no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs signs, saying that we weren't welcome in Great Britain. And what we're seeing now is a return of this type of vile racism. We've had the racist go home advance. We've got the immigration bill, stop and search of people to look at their immigration status. And austerity is amplifying race discrimination. Disproportionate impact of job cuts, of service cuts, and hurting migrant communities and black communities. And when I talk about black, I go back to the historical use of the term black, which is an inclusive term to incorporate everybody of colour, a term of empowerment and unity. In some local authorities here in London, where black workers make up 5 to 7% of their workforce, they make up 50 to 60% of the redundancies. That's gross racism, a gross disproportionate impact. And when black people lose their jobs, it takes them longer to get back into work. They stay longer on the unemployment line because of the racism that already existed in the labour market. 1 in 2 young black people today are unemployed. The deepest cuts have been made to the most deprived areas in the UK. And these are the areas where migrant people and black people live because of the discrimination we face throughout society. So we face the worst services, the least opportunities for jobs, and the slashing of EMA, the tripling of tuition fees is barring education to migrant and black young people. Black women also face multiple discrimination along with young black people. And the police, who 20 years ago, when Stephen Lawrence was murdered, was supposed to address institutional racism, are more institutionally racist today than they have ever been. Yes. And so we need to stand up to institutionalized racism. Young black people up to 32 times likely to be stopped and searched in some areas when compared to their white counterparts. We've had a series of deaths at the hands of the state and the police that are impacting disproportionately on young black people. And we must remember the families of Christopher Alder, of Sean Rigg, and of Mark Duggan, who have to fight for years and even decades for justice and answers as to why their loved ones were murdered by the police and by the state. And in January, an inquest came to the conclusion that the murder of Mark Duggan was lawful, even though he had no weapon in his hand at the time. And this is a gross injustice that we need to stand up to, all communities, black and white, because it could be any of us, it could be our children that this happens to. The cuts to legal aid, the fees for employment tribunals mean that access to justice is being barred for the poorest, again, disproportionately black. And I'm proud that my union, PCS, and my organisation, BARAC, standing up with families who are trying to campaign against racism and injustice. And I say to you that we must remember that being black is not a crime. See it on my back. Being black is not a crime. Say it with me. Being black is not a crime. So all of us here today, we need to stand up against gross discrimination, racism, the attacks on migrants, the attacks by the far right, the attacks by government leaders who see us as third-class citizens in this country. We need to stand in unity and we need to say no to racism, no to fascism. We're not going to stand by when you see somebody impacted by racism. You need to stand up, speak out, come together and push them down into the gutter where they belong. Solidarity!
Thank you, Zita. You look like you're in the